Before you create your first page in Dreamweaver, it's important to go through the site definition process, which involves setting up a root website folder where you will store all of the files, images, multimedia files, everything that'll go in your website should go in that main root folder. If you're creating a completely new site, you can do that by choosing Site, New Site. In the site definition dialog, I prefer to work with the advanced options. If you open this dialog and you see the basic screen, just click on the Advanced tab at the top and you should open the same dialog I have open here. And in the Site Definition dialog box, you want to first give your site a name. You can name your site anything you want. I'm going to call this one Happy Birthday. Okay, so maybe it's not your birthday, but humor me as we go along with this lesson. The next thing in the site definition is probably the most important thing. It's the local root folder. And when you create a new site in Dreamweaver, you'll notice if I click on this little icon over here on the right, by the way, anytime you see one of these little yellow folder icons, that indicates that it's a browse button, meaning that if you click on it, you'll be able to browse for a file or folder. In this case, when I click on the browse icon, I get a dialog that lets me choose the local root folder for my website. Remember, this is the folder where you're going to store all of the files for all of the pages and images in your site. Dreamweaver automatically creates a new empty folder and gives it a generic name, in this case, unnamed site 2, when you create a new site. You can change the name of that folder, you can select a different folder, or you can create a new folder in a different place on your hard drive. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go into the desktop and now into my lesson files, into part 1, into lesson 2, and I'm going to create a new folder here in lesson 2 where I will store all of the files for this website. If you're on a Macintosh, you'll do exactly the same thing. Just use the icons and tools on the Mac to create a new folder as I am here on the PC. You can create this new folder anywhere you want on your hard drive, but to keep things organized, I'm going to create a new folder here, just clicking on the Create New Folder icon. And I'm going to give it a name. Now you can name this folder anything you want, so I'm going to call it Happy Birthday. And then you want to select that folder. And you'll notice this button here, it says Open. As soon as you've opened it, it changes to Select. And what you're really doing here is selecting the folder you just created called Happy Birthday. And when I click on Select, you'll see Dreamweaver has now inserted that folder and given me the path on my hard drive and designated that as the local root folder. Throughout this lesson, I'll be doing this over and over again as we set up new sites at the beginning of each lesson. If this is still seeming a little confusing, I'm sure you'll get the hang of it soon. But the key thing to get clear here is that you're creating one folder and telling Dreamweaver where it is so that Dreamweaver can keep track of all of the files in your site. Now you also have an option to set up a default images folder. That's a choice you can make. You don't have to have an images folder, and you certainly don't have to have only one images folder. But the advantage of setting up an images folder is that if you link to images that aren't inside your root folder, Dreamweaver will copy those images into whatever folder you designate as the images folder. So since I don't yet have an images folder, I'm going to do almost the same thing I just did. So you'll just click on the yellow folder icon again, and since we just selected the Happy Birthday folder as our main root folder, Dreamweaver puts us right into that folder already. So now you want to create another new folder, and I'm going to call this one Images. Now you want to select that folder, so just click on the icon, make sure Image is selected, and again you see this button has changed to Open, but when you click on it, it says Select. So now what I've done is I've selected my new images folder and designated that as the default images folder in my local root site folder. Okay, now you have a choice about how links are created in your site, and a lot of this site setup is really about helping Dreamweaver manage the links within your website. The simplest option and the default in Dreamweaver is to have links relative to the document, which means that the path will always begin at the root level directory or the root folder of your site and work its way down to the file you're linking to. If that doesn't really make sense to you, don't worry about it. But do check, if you're working on a website with a team of people, you do want to ask whether you should set your links to document or to site root. If you're working on it by yourself, document is a perfectly fine option. The HTTP address, as you might guess, is simply the web address of your site. So if I owned happybirthday.com, I could type that in here, but I don't. And since I'm just creating this locally as a test site, I don't have to fill in this field at all. Case-sensitive link checking is also optional. I prefer to check that one in case I ever name a file or folder outside of Dreamweaver, because I want to make sure that any link checking I do later will make sure that my links match in case as well as in file name and structure. That only matters if you're using a Unix or a Linux web server, which many commercial service providers use. And the challenging part here is that if you're working on a Macintosh or a PC, which most of us do while we're building a site on our local machine, you run the risk that if the case does not match in your links, they can break when you move to a Unix server. Now, if you set all of your links within Dreamweaver and you never change a file name outside of Dreamweaver, you shouldn't run into this problem. But as a safety, I always like to select this option, just to know I'll get that double check when I use the link checking feature later. The Enable Cache option is by default checked, and I recommend you leave it checked, because that lets Dreamweaver create a cache of all of the files in your site and helps you work more quickly and efficiently. Once you have all the fields filled in here in the Local Info category, let's go ahead and click OK. For now, that's more than enough to have set up. And you see now in the Files panel, if this isn't open on your screen, you can click this little arrow to open Files. You see now we have the Happy Birthday folder, and you can see where it is on your hard drive there. And inside that, we have an Images folder, and if you click the little plus sign, there's nothing in there at the moment.